I'm Pete Sampson, and welcome to the latest episode of The Independent, a one-man show tonight as I'm wrapping up here at Yankee Stadium after Notre Dame's dominant performance, a 49-14 win over Army in the Shamrock Series. Plenty to get to tonight, but I don't know how this came across on the television broadcast or for people who are here, but how matter-of-fact Marcus Freeman was after the game tonight, where he seemed to spend as much time on the penalties on Army's first touchdown drive, the field goal mishaps that led to a block that was a blocked Mitch Jeter kick, and the offensive miscues on one drive that ended with a fourth down stop at the goal line, which I think probably said a whole lot about maybe the standard of where Marcus Freeman expects Notre Dame to be as they're sitting here at 10-1 going to USC next weekend, which, by the way, will be a 3:30 p.m., 12 Eastern, 12:30 p.m. West Coast time kickoff as Notre Dame can wrap up a home playoff game in the college football playoff. But I think that Marcus Freeman's demeanor tonight, I think you saw it in Adon Schuler and Jeremiyah Love, who came out afterwards as well. You know, when Adon Schuler talks about the penalties and how no one can score on Notre Dame if they don't commit those kind of penalties, don't hurt themselves. When Jeremiyah Love comes out and he's talking about team glory and just sort of kind of repeating what his head coach probably said in the locker room 15 minutes earlier. I think that's a sign of a team that is kind of all in it together. And it's easy, I think, for players to pick up on talking points after losses because you're trying to not say anything in some ways. But when you're picking up on talking points after big wins like you do tonight, that might say something else. And, you know, it's like Notre Dame seems like it's kind of got the best of both worlds happening right now, where they're playing incredibly well. And I think you look over the last 10 games, they're outscoring. I think they're a plus 300 scoring margin during their 9-game win streak. So they've got that going for them. They're an incredibly confident group, and yet it almost feels like they keep getting something from Northern Illinois every week, as if they're not going to be satisfied with finishing 11-1 with a win next week and hosting in the playoff, which was sort of the break-even mark for this team this year, regardless, is to host a home playoff game. But I think when you get to that point and you can sort of talk about the things that go wrong or the things that you need to improve out of the gate, I think that sort of says something about the mindset of this team right now, and that would give me probably more confidence than anything else about Notre Dame going to Los Angeles next week and winning. It's not just, Jeremiyah Love rushing 7 carries for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, or Notre Dame out-rushing Army, or holding Bryson Daly to the least impressive 139-yard, 2-touchdown performance in college football history. It was funny coming up back to the press box. We passed Daly walking into his sort of post-game presser, and I think he just turned to his teammates, or his teammate turned to him and was just like, "Man, dude, those guys are just really good." And Jeff Monken, their head coach, who has done a phenomenal job at West Point, talking about how well coached Notre Dame is, how they got outclassed tonight. Army players talking post-game about how well coached and how hard Notre Dame plays, from start of the game to the end of the game. Basically the kind of stuff that you would hear other teams describe Army as playing like. And I think that says something, too, about sort of where Marcus Freeman has Notre Dame wired heading into Game 12 next week in Los Angeles. So it's just impressive overall. Riley Leonard tonight, 10 of 13, 148 yards, 2 touchdowns. Very efficient, not asked to do a whole lot, didn't have to do a whole lot. And yet I think Notre Dame finished the game, I want to say, with 14 plays of 10 yards or more from 8 different players. And so it was a very diverse bludgeoning that Notre Dame put on Army tonight. And that is also, I think, encouraging for Notre Dame to going, Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Thomas, Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison, Mitchell Evans, Jordan Faison, Bo Collins, all with gains of at least 10 yards. And obviously Jeremiyah Love, Aeneas Williams, Jadarian Price, and Riley Leonard all doing the same. I think Aeneas Williams might have been the one that made it 9 players with plays of 10 yards or more. So it's a very impressive performance from Notre Dame that probably won't register a whole lot beyond tonight because things move so quickly towards USC and there's so much put into the college football playoff. And then you're looking at the scores around the country today with Indiana losing. As I'm sitting here talking to you, A&M and Auburn are going to overtime. Penn State winning by 1. Alabama getting embarrassed at Oklahoma. Florida beating Ole Miss. What do you make of Georgia, air quotes, struggling with UMass when it's 59-21? It's a time of college football season where consistency kind of starts to fade away, right? You don't see teams go out week in and week out and just put in consistent performance after consistent performance after consistent performance. But I think that's where Notre Dame is right now. And you go back to some of the commentary post-game from the players and the coaches, it feels like a very confident group that is not boastful about it at the same time. It just seems like Notre Dame is wired in a very healthy spot, thanks to Marcus Freeman and this staff. What Al Golden accomplished tonight defensively, I thought was phenomenal. Bryson Daly, again, the least impressive 139-yard performance you can imagine. I believe that Army finished the game with 2 or 3 plays of 10 yards or more, and their longest play of the game, I'm going to have to go back and watch this, but Daly was credited with a 19-yard run in the first half that ended with Jack Kaiser falling on a fumble. So that hardly counts as an explosive play when it ends up in Notre Dame hands, and I have to go back and see exactly what that game was before it got flipped over. So, yeah, it's Notre Dame is at a spot right now where I thought they hit on all cylinders defensively, even how they came out of the gates with Jaden Ausberry making that just a tackle right away on Bryson Daly. And then I thought maybe one of the sneaky impressive stats in the box score tonight, Army started 0 of 3 on 4th down. They were all daily runs, and we're talking about a team that had 3 failed 4th down conversions all year. They were 16 of 19 coming into tonight, and went 1 of 4. The one was cosmetic, and which would be a generous way to describe it, when Bryson Daly, I want to say, picked up 3 yards or 2 yards on 4th and 1 or 3 yards on 4th and 2 down by the goal line, was still short, and then finally scored a carry later. But where Notre Dame is right now defensively is incredibly impressive, and we talked to Adon Schuler after the game. I think he called the scout team offense the Marauders when they prepare for the option. Credited the coaching staff for sort of getting him in the right frame of mind, which I think you pair the Army-Navy performances together, just 2 absolute demolishing performances where to take the will away from Army and Navy is a hell of a thing to do, because pretty much nobody else nationally can do that. Notre Dame has. We saw Navy pretty much collapse after the Notre Dame game when they lost to Rice, and I think were blown out by Tulane a week later. We'll see what happens with Army from here. They will be playing in the American Athletic Conference Championship game, I believe, against Tulane. They still have Navy after Conference Championship weekend, but for Notre Dame to sort of reduce Army and Navy to inefficient offenses, to teams that have a hard time getting off the mat a week later. We'll see what happens with Army. Like I said, that's really impressive. And I mentioned earlier about how, when Army is complimenting your offensive line about how they never quit, they're well coached, they don't make mistakes, they're aggressive from start to finish. Again, it's the kind of stuff that you would hear from Notre Dame about Army or Navy, or any Army or Navy opponent against about Army or Navy. To me, that is just incredibly impressive for where Notre Dame is moving forward. But yeah, I mean, Bryson Daly tonight, again, there's no threat of a run or a pass option at all. He finishes 4 of 8 for 26 yards. I believe he had one passing first down, or only one pass of 10 yards or more. And you could think back about how much work it seems to take for Army to advance the ball down the field. Daly was getting hit on that play, barely got the pass out. It was a diving reception along the sideline to Reynolds. There's just not anything out there that Notre Dame's defense is giving up, and I think that is just an incredibly impressive performance from Al Golden's group, because I think as the saying goes, that there's always something, right? Like Army or Navy, they have a counter to your counter, and then they have a counter to what you think your counter is going to be after you counter it. Nobody's open. Like there are not guys running loose. There's not sort of empty grass that you're like, oh, you're scrambling to catch up to it. Everything is covered up. I thought they played the pass as well tonight as it against Florida State, when you knew Florida State was going to pass it the whole time. And you never see that against Army. I mean, you didn't see that against Navy. There were a couple spots where you felt like Navy could have hit Notre Dame with some big, I don't want to say gimmick plays, but kind of trick plays where they got Notre Dame confused, move their eyes around a little bit. There was nothing like that tonight. I don't think there would have been if Army tried to push the issue a little bit more in the past game. And just as a note of how well drilled Notre Dame's defense was, I believe they had 14 players with at least 2 tackles. Adon Schuler led the team with 8, Jaden Osbury with 7, and then Junior Tuihalamaka and Donovan Heinisch both had 5. You didn't miss Howard Cross at all. Like, at all. And that is it's one thing to do that against Virginia, which is kind of a sputtering offense and has to throw the ball to have success. But when you can do that against Army, the number 1 rush offense in the country, I believe they came into tonight at roughly 70 yards more per game than number 2 Boise State. Just way up there. So that is really impressive. Ultimately, Army finishes with just 233 yards tonight, and just 207 on the ground, which is absolutely nothing for them. Again, the 26 yards passing. Notre Dame heads to USC having allowed more than 14 points in a game just once all season. That was against Louisville when they gifted the Cardinals a couple short fields due to kind of unfortunate turnovers. That should give Notre Dame a ton of confidence, as if they needed any more, going to USC next week. So I'm incredibly impressed with the performance tonight. I will also say like the Shamrock Series, I think can be a mixed bag for Notre Dame, where you remove a home game. Does the venue live up to the hype? I know they played in Yankee Stadium twice before, but I do think like New York and probably Las Vegas are the natural homes of the Shamrock Series, and probably could be in the rotation a little bit more. I was fortunate enough to go to the Mass on Saturday morning at St. Patrick's Cathedral. That was a cool moment to be a part of. And then you sort of see all the Notre Dame fans around town in a city where it's pretty easy to get lost and blend in. Notre Dame stood out. And I think, this is a city where it's, again, there's enough going on here that a Notre Dame football game can sort of get lost in the mix. Notre Dame did not. The fan turnout, while it was slow arriving, and I know there were some things on social media about, like, the inability to get in to the stadium in a timely manner, maybe some gates not being open as they should be. That, by midway through the first quarter, end of the first quarter, it felt full-ish. Notre Dame has played some Shamrock Series and some other venues where it feels like maybe the town didn't come out for it. This was not one of those. I thought they did a really nice job, just from the jerseys down to even just the fonts. They did a nice job with that. Nice job in the city. Yankee Stadium is not a great place to watch a football game. But in terms of like the whole vibe of a Shamrock Series weekend, it definitely delivered in that way. So maybe they should just rotate New York and Vegas every other year if they're going to keep doing this. Because they did a nice job with it, I thought. It felt like kind of a big deal when you were at the game, and I would say it's the opponent was fine. Would you have preferred to see Notre Dame play Miami this year? Yeah, than Army, but Miami backed out of that game, which created the opening for the Shamrock Series in the first place. I thought to say Notre Dame made the best of a bad situation completely undersells how good of a job Notre Dame did staging this. Again, from whatever Hamilton production they have Friday night, to the mass, to the band, to the game. They did a nice job start to finish on that. It's interesting. You think back about the last time the Shamrock Series was here in New York, and the video board and the job they did, sort of spurring Notre Dame on to add a video board itself, pre-Campus Crossroads. But it was a job well done by Notre Dame tonight. On the field and off, and so now they go to USC at 10-1 with a chance to close it out. Certainly host a home playoff game. And I will say, once Matt comes back on the podcast, perhaps we can have this discussion. At what point does Notre Dame's strength of performance over the last 2 months push them ahead of Penn State? Because at this point, what has Penn State shown other than they could lose close to Ohio State, which, don't get me wrong, that is something. But then when you go to Minnesota and win by a point, when you need overtime to beat USC, which, I don't get over my skis there before Notre Dame goes to USC, but you get in those situations, I think that the committee would have to have a discussion about whether Notre Dame should be ahead of Penn State or not. They have the same record. Penn State finishes up with Maryland next week. Notre Dame finishes up with USC, which will be a like-for-like opponent. And the reason that's important, it's not just sort of a Twitter discussion. It could be the difference between being the 6th seed in the playoff and being the 7th seed in the playoff. And the difference between that could be getting the SEC champion in round 2 if you're the 7th seed, or getting the ACC champion in round 2 if you're the 6th seed. And to me, I think that it's hard to look at Penn State and think that's a team that is peaking. That's a team that's playing good football. That's a team that knows who it is. And then you watch Notre Dame, and I get it. The competition level has been low this year. It's been one of the weakest schedules, if not the weakest schedule that I can remember Notre Dame ever playing since I've been on the beat since 2001. But they're just running people off the field. In some ways, it feels sort of like, the quality of football Notre Dame is playing, maybe similar to Army, up until North Texas, where they just were blowing people out. And, that's what Notre Dame has done. Like I said, a plus 300 scoring margin during the 8-game win streak. That's ridiculous. So Penn State isn't even close to that. And I think that Notre Dame, when the committee comes out with its rankings on Tuesday night, obviously Notre Dame's going to move ahead of Indiana. But why shouldn't they move ahead of Penn State as well? I don't see any reason for that they shouldn't. So we may go from an earlier college football playoff poll where the conversation was, what would it be like for Notre Dame to play at Penn State? I think that was after the first bracketing came out. At this point, it should be like, why isn't Notre Dame replacing Penn State as the second highest or the highest rated non-participant in a conference championship game? I don't have a problem if Ohio State beats Michigan next week, loses to Oregon, if they're still ahead of Notre Dame. I don't have a problem if the loser of the SEC championship game, let's say it's Texas at 11-2, if they're still ahead of Notre Dame. Although you could have a conversation about who the heck Texas has actually played. Although if they lost the SEC championship game, they would have a win at Texas A&M. But after that, I'm not sure I get the point that Notre Dame shouldn't be higher. And look, I get it that for Notre Dame to be the 6th, they can only be behind one conference champion. And so maybe Texas A&M will do Notre Dame a solid, beat Texas, and lose in the conference championship game in the SEC, and that puts Notre Dame in the 6th spot ahead of Penn State, but behind Oregon or Ohio State. But after that, I don't know who's playing better football in college football right now than Notre Dame. And Marcus Freeman was asked about it last game. It's sort of the juicy statement. What do you think? What does this say to voters? What does this say to the committee kind of question, which you've got to ask at this point. But Marcus Freeman was adamant about not taking the bait on that, that his entire demeanor tonight was reflected in his answer to that question and a bunch of other ones, that he felt like Notre Dame probably could have played better than they actually did. And when you're up 49-7 late in the fourth quarter against an undefeated top 25 team, and if you don't want to give Army credit for being a full-on classic top 25 team, I think that's fine. I think after watching Navy, you're like, oh, okay, maybe this was a byproduct of scheduling as much as anything. The same was true of Army. When you play one of the worst schedules in college football, I believe Sagarin had them at 137 going into the year, or going into this weekend. That's fine. But Army is a lot better than a team that should be being beat 49-7 as well. If this was just an okay Army team and not maybe inflated by their schedule, coming in here at 9-0, that's fine. But it's not like Notre Dame won 28-13, which I think was my score prediction. I was not even close on that, because Notre Dame's talent edge and making that talent edge work was so dominant tonight that it was a byproduct, I think, of really good coaching. I will say, to Marcus Freeman's point about the inefficiencies that Notre Dame had, there were three that stood out, and it's worth addressing all three here. One, the defensive penalties. That one I would rank dead last. You had a Jack Kaiser late hit. I sort of trust Jack Kaiser not to do that. A Riley Mills hands to the face. Again, it happens. Something that I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on if I was Marcus Freeman or Al Golden. Mitch Jeter, I would spend a lot of time on that. I think Notre Dame has a major problem at place kicker right now, and it may not matter at USC, and it may heal up by the time Notre Dame plays in December. But if Mitch Jeter that we saw tonight was healthy Mitch Jeter, and if he played, you would think that he is close or there to being healthy. That was not good. I believe the first field goal attempt was 47 yards, pushed back by a false start. It was not close. It did not look good coming off his foot at all. The second one got blocked. I realized the guy jumped over the offensive line, or the special teams line, but that felt so slow in approach by Jeter that it's difficult for me to believe that Marty Biaggi feels confident about where he is at place kicker right now. Does that mean you go to Zach Yoakum? Does that mean you go to Eric Goins, who has sort of taken over on kickoff? It's got to be a conversation, at least for USC week, that Mitch Jeter doesn't give you the best chance to win. And then the last one was the drive that stalled out basically at the 1 yard line. I thought the play calling on that was really poor. I did not need to see Riley Leonard jump in the air sideways any more than I already had. And again, it's like, if you have an incredible speed advantage with your running backs, go to the outside as much as humanly possible. And for a brief moment, just one series, to be fair, Mike Denbrock seemed to get away from that and just pound the ball up the middle. The fourth down play where it felt like Jeremiyah Love was lined up at the 20-yard line with Riley Leonard and shotgun. Not a great look. But, hey, look, if Marcus Freeman is going to nitpick this kind of stuff, we might as well bring it up on the podcast, because that was a bad look. That was a really bad look. It happens. But, look, the rest of Notre Dame's other drives, this is their drive chart. Touchdown, The drive that ended with the stop at the 1 yard line, touchdown, a missed field goal that was short, touchdown, a field goal that got blocked, touchdown, end of game. They were going to score on they could have scored on every drive that they had tonight. They should have scored when they got stopped down by the goal line. The field goals were not particularly close. One obviously getting blocked, the other one coming up well short. So we'll chalk those up as mistakes, but otherwise, this could have been 56-7 late in the fourth quarter. Notre Dame has a lot going for it, and I think that they know who they are offensively. I just wonder if maybe Denbrock could have got a little cuter. We sort of bang on offensive coordinators sometimes for getting too cute. In that instance, I think he sort of got a little too uncreative. But that doesn't get to a series later when they sort of had this motion shift down by the goal line, which I actually kind of liked a lot. I don't know how efficient it was, but a different way to try to create space down by the goal line at a time when, frankly, you didn't really need it. But as Marcus Freeman talked about it, with the fake punts, fake kicks earlier, if they install something and they have a chance to use it, they're really not going to worry about the idea of saving something. They're going to put it on tape. And they're going to make USC at least rep it this week in practice. They're going to make whoever they play in the college football playoff rep it as they get ready to come up to South Bend. So Notre Dame, not a flawless performance tonight, but pretty damn close. Closer than I think Marcus Freeman may have been willing to give Notre Dame credit for immediately post-game. But that's, again, like I talked about earlier, that's where Notre Dame is right now. They are a team that is playing incredibly well, and they have a sky-high amount of confidence, and yet they still seem to be getting some fuel, at least, from the Northern Illinois game. And that, to me, is pretty impressive because that was a long time ago, and they've played enough good football since then that they could have flushed that performance completely. And the way that they keep coming to answer the bell every Saturday when you see what's going on around the country and other teams just can't seem to do it, whether that is, I don't want to bang on Indiana too much for losing at Ohio State, but certainly Penn State squeaking by Minnesota thanks to a fake punt. Alabama, a complete no-show tonight at Oklahoma when Jalen Milroe, their supposed star quarterback, goes 11-26 for 164 yards and 3 picks. Ole Miss melting down the stretch as Jackson Dart seemed intent on throwing an interception late in the game. There's a lot of teams that just don't answer the bell every week. BYU, undefeated, now 9-2 after back-to-back losses. Kansas, now Arizona State. Colorado probably felt pretty good about itself and a chance to control its track to the Big 12 championship game. They really get hammered by Kansas, 37-21. For how good Shedeur Sanders is, they allow Kansas's lead rusher, Devin Neal, 37 carries for 207 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's just hard to do it every week and answer the bell. And Notre Dame has done a phenomenal job of that. The last 6 games, they've emptied the bench 6 times. And to have that 300-point scoring margin over the last 9 games, I think that's got to count for something. Notre Dame has put up some very gaudy statistics. They're still number 1 in the country in pass efficiency defense. I think until Army scored with less than 30 seconds to go, Notre Dame was going to move up. Well, I think they should move up to number 2 in scoring defense regardless because number 1 was Army before tonight. Their 3rd and 4th down defense, phenomenal. What they're doing on the ground, phenomenal. And so I think that Notre Dame should feel really good about itself offensively and defensively. It's special teams where they've got a lot of stuff to work out. Well, not a lot of stuff. They've got a kicker problem to work out. And will that cost them next week at USC? it's kind of hard to look at the Trojans and feel like they're going to be able to push Notre Dame on both lines of scrimmage the way that Notre Dame can push back. Lesser teams have figured that out, whether that be Army, Navy, Florida State, Virginia, Stanford. They've been shoved around by Notre Dame. I don't see how USC, as I'm talking to you, they're late in the second quarter here. They're up 6-3. How USC is going to be able to hold up on both lines next week, difficult to say, difficult to figure out how that's going to work out. So Notre Dame heads into the season finale at USC full of confidence, even if Marcus Freeman didn't let it on tonight. Next week, we will be back with a regular midweek episode of The Independent, maybe a day early with the Thanksgiving holiday. And then obviously we'll reconvene post-game in LA. We'll get back to sort of our regularly scheduled video interactive podcast where we can ask questions in StreamYard on YouTube and all that stuff. So until next week, our midweek podcast, I'm Pete Sampson. Following Notre Dame's blowout win over Army, the Irish moved to 10-1 on the season with a 49-14 win in the Shamrock Series. They continue to be undefeated in that. And so until our next episode, I'm Pete Sampson. You've been listening to a rare one-man booth of The Independent. Thanks for being with me.